This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little there, hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance. They'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. Hey, What Next listeners? It's Mary Harris. Before we get to today's episode, I have a favor to ask. This relationship feels slightly one-sided. Just me talking to you all the time. We want to change that. We have a listener survey we want you to fill out. It's going to really help us do the show better. And we'll hear from you. What you want, what you need, what you love, what you hate. All of that stuff. You can find the survey in our show notes for all the latest episodes, or you can visit slate.com/whatnextsurvey. Okay, on to the show. Fred, how would you characterize world leaders' responses to Donald Trump being reelected as president of the United States?
Well, I mean, I know that many of them are panicked, borderline terrified.
Fred Kaplan is Slate's War Stories correspondent. Why do you say that?
I mean, they've experienced him before. They know that he is not a fan of alliances in general. You know, like at one point when he was president, somebody was explaining NATO to him. And he said, wait, you're telling me that I have to go to war if Lithuania is attacked?
Panicked or not, world leaders are preparing to work with Donald Trump, sending him public congratulations on social media, calling him privately to wish him the best. In the last week, Trump has reportedly spoken with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky, and Russia's Vladimir Putin. How he shuffles these relationships after January 20th? Well, Fred's got some ideas about that.
One thing about him is that there's a consistency. Very rarely have I watched him do something and I say, wow, I wasn't expecting that, at least in international relations. So, look, he has said that he's tired of the United States spending so much money on Ukraine, which isn't going to win the war. The one place where he is keen to lend a hand or give great support to a warring country is Israel. He's talked about renewing his maximum pressure policy on Iran.
But just because Trump is predictable doesn't mean what happens next will be. Like a lot of people, Fred has been arguing that this administration will practice a kind of unvarnished version of MAGA. So I asked him to go deeper on that, what it actually means. You've said right now would be a good time to check out some books on the years between World War I and World War II.
Yeah.
Why? Like, what are we going to find there that's going to explain the next few years to us?
These were the years between the two wars when the United States retreated into a sort of isolationism. And slowly but surely, alliances were formed between Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan, and it kind of snuck up on us.
This shift took decades, more than one presidency for sure.
And initially, Chamberlain in Britain tried to appease Nazi Germany, Nazi Germany would take over Czechoslovakia, and Chamberlain would pronounce that he has talked with the Fuhrer, who has assured him that his territorial aspirations don't go any further. And isolationists in the U.S. Senate would refer to Czechoslovakia as a faraway country whose people don't concern us in the slightest. And I'm not, as the saying goes, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. I'm not saying that we're on the brink of World War III.
But I think you're saying that isolationism means that war can creep up on you.
Yeah, exactly. You have to keep your eye on these things. And it's quite frightening.
Today on the show, how a Trump presidency could reshape America's foreign policy for decades. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This episode is brought to you by Public.com. Did you know that you can lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at Public.com? The Federal Reserve just announced a big rate cut, and there could be more rate cuts this year and in 2025 as well. That's good news if you're looking to buy a home, but it might not be so good for the interest rate you earn on your cash. So, if you want to lock in a 6% or higher yield with a diversified portfolio or high yield and investment grade bonds, check out Public.com. It only takes a couple of minutes to sign up, and once you lock in your yield, you can earn regular interest payments, even as rates decline. Lock in 6% or higher yield with a bond account at public.com/whatnext. But remember, your yield is not locked in until you invest. Brought to you by Public Investing, member FINRA and SIPC. As of September 26, 2024, the average annualized yield to worst across the bond account is greater than 6%. Yield to worst is not guaranteed. Not an investment recommendation. All investing involves risk. Visit public.com/disclosures/bond-account for more info. This show is brought to you by Discover. Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It's extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. I asked Fred to start in Ukraine. Earlier this year, Ukraine broke through into parts of Western Russia, occupying the area around Kursk. But Russia has been pushing back, with a little help from its ally North Korea, which just sent 10,000 troops to assist in a ground invasion. Now, 50,000 soldiers, Russians and North Koreans, are on the brink of a massive counteroffensive, one that could tip the scales of a long, bloody stalemate.
I mean, this war has been going on for, a few months shy of 3 years now. The estimate is Ukraine, 80,000 soldiers dead, 400,000 wounded. Russia, 200,000 soldiers dead, 400,000 wounded.
That's staggering.
I don't think anybody going into this war thought that Putin would tolerate this kind of loss. He is literally using his own people as cannon fodder. He's now, he's been buying or getting drones from Iran, missiles from North Korea, and now, as you mentioned, 10,000 North Korean troops.
More cannon fodder.
Yeah, more cannon fodder, because these are, I don't know how elite they are, but they're North Korean troops who will do whatever Kim Jong-un tells them, and Kim Jong-un told them to go fight aside our valiant allies in Russia.
The pain point seems really high for both sides right now.
It's insane. It's insane. And I think Trump's inclination, and, in some ways it's a very understandable inclination, is, look, this is just nuts. And, we've spent $60 billion sending Ukraine arms, although most of that is money to U.S. weapons manufacturers. But still, it's a lot of money. And so his inclination is, let's just stop this thing. And hey, I know how to do deals.
Yeah, Trump has said he's going to end the fighting in Ukraine in 24 hours. Has he suggested how?
Well, Viktor Orban said,
Prime Minister of Hungary.
Yeah, Trump told him that the way he was going to stop the war is just to cancel all aid to Ukraine. And then Ukraine will have to make a deal with Russia.
Surrender.
Basically surrender. Now, there have been people who are aligned with Trump hasn't laid out anything specifically, who have said, well, let's just stop the war where the troops are.
Yeah, J.D. Vance has suggested this, right? Just freeze the current front lines.
Yeah, which would mean that Russia would occupy about a little more than 15% of Ukraine, including almost all of the eastern regions of Donbass. But does anybody truly think that if that happened, Putin would just stop there? Are we going to send a big NATO or UN peacekeeping force to keep them from doing anything?
Well, Vance also said we want Ukraine to give up on joining NATO because they've been trying to get in there.
Right, that's right. And also give up the Crimea as well. I think Zelensky, president of Ukraine, would like to have a peace, but he doesn't want to give up Ukrainian independence. And he also wants to emerge from the war, if not with membership in NATO, then at least with some kind of security guarantees from somebody and a clear path toward joining the European Union, which is what Putin has feared all along. He doesn't want to lose Ukraine. He truly sees Ukraine as part of Russia. Read his speeches. Look at what he's been saying. He's made no bones about his ultimate goal and his lifelong dream of restoring the great Russian Empire.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, opposition to support for Ukraine has become a core position of the Republican Party's MAGA wing. So I just think it would be helpful to lay out how withholding aid would work and what it would mean in the end.
Well, there still would be a pipeline. And in fact, one thing that Biden is doing is upping the commitment so that there's a cushion. And the Europeans are actually and have been sending quite a lot as well. But they can't do it by themselves. It's the same thing with just the defense of Europe in general. NATO is a U.S.-led operation. There are some Europeans, especially in France, who would like to build an independent European defense force so they don't have to count on what is looking more and more like an unreliable American ally. I asked someone in Berlin when I was there about a year ago, if the Europeans, Germany, France, and so forth, decided right now, okay, we're going to build an independent European defense force, and here's the money, we're committing it, how long would it take to build? And he said, well, about a decade.
So you've mentioned how right now the Biden administration is trying to build in this little cushion of aid for Ukraine that will last a little while. When does the cushion run out for Ukraine? And is that then the point where Volodymyr Zelensky has to make some tough decisions?
Well, look, I've always thought, and most people who talk honestly about it have always thought, that in the end, Ukraine will have to give up some territory. This is an unfair war. Russia has been able to attack Ukraine at whim, and Ukraine hasn't been able to do much against Russia. They have some long-range weapons. They've been prohibited from using U.S. weapons to attack very deeply into Russia. So, people in Moscow don't have to worry much about getting bombed, whereas people in Kyiv do. But that's just the way of the war. I had thought from early on that if both sides get exhausted, maybe the deal that would be reached would be something like Russia keeps Crimea, and there's some sort of internationally supervised referendum in the eastern part of Ukraine to figure out whether it's Russian or whether it's Ukrainian. I think toward the beginning of the war, Russia would have won that referendum, and now they wouldn't. But Putin has enlarged his aims since then. He wants all of Ukraine.
So are you saying that like a year from now, the war may be over, but Ukraine as we know it also might not exist?
That's possible. But, listen, if you had asked me in March of 2022, a month after this war started, if the war would still be going on, and in fact, soldiers getting killed more than ever, every day would still be going on in November of 2024, if I had to put money on it, I would have bet against that being the case. So we don't know. Nobody knows. Trump, I think, genuinely does want the war to be over. He thinks that because he's friends with Putin, Putin will do him a favor.
Yeah, I guess we're all about to learn how badly Trump wants this war over.
Trump put out the word the other day that, I asked Putin not to escalate the war in Ukraine. And the Russians The Kremlin spokesman denied that this conversation ever took place. Whether it did or not, I mean, Putin's not going to relax his aims as a favor to Donald Trump. He's got a counteroffensive force of 50,000 just poised in Kursk to try to kick out the Ukrainians who are still in Russia and wage a counteroffensive. So international relations, personal relations play a role, no question. But the predominant role is what leaders' interests are. If Putin is allowed to just take over all of Ukraine, I think a clear lesson is sent to China in its aspirations to at least neutralize Taiwan as a possibly independent country. People watch these things. They look and they see, well, what is the United States response?
Can I get away with some crap?
Yeah, can I get away?
After the break, Israel and Gaza. This show is brought to you by Discover. Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It's extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
I want to pivot to talking about Israel and Gaza now, if we can. I guess, first of all, how giddy is Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, now that Trump has been reelected president of the U.S.?
Very giddy.
How do we see that?
It's all out in the open. I mean, that's the thing about Trump. I mean, you don't have to decipher obscure codes to figure out what's going on. He says it all quite plainly. Months ago, he said Israel should just finish the war, get it over with quickly, and win. He didn't say you should really get some kind of ceasefire thing going very quickly. No, he said get it over with.
But what does it mean for Israel to win? What happens? The complaint has always been Israel doesn't have a plan for the day after.
Well, I don't think Trump does either, but he accepts Netanyahu's definition of total victory, which is to wipe out Hamas as any kind of political or military force in Gaza, which might mean reoccupying Gaza.
Yeah, you noted that Netanyahu announced a new ambassador to Washington over the past week. And it's a big deal because it kind of indicates what Netanyahu is thinking about next. Can you explain?
Well, yeah, this ambassador, he is a very prominent writer and activist in the radical settlement movement. He is American-born. When he was a kid, he joined the Jewish Defense League, led by Meir Kahane, a very radical rabbi who was calling for the expulsion of all Arabs from Israel. He moved with his parents to Israel in a settlement. He wants the permanent annexation of the West Bank and parts of Gaza.
And annexation basically means Israel takes over.
Yeah, Israel takes it over, formally.
Yeah.
It's part of Israel now. Usually, Israel has had as ambassadors to the U.S., you talk with them, they sound very reasonable, almost even moderate. This guy, there's no disguising what he's for. It shows Netanyahu's priorities are annexation, not normalization. And I'm sure he must have told Trump who he was planning to send. And Trump said, fine, that's fine.
Yeah, you've said Israel is likely to ramp up its aggression against Palestinians in the coming months. Basically, there's going to be a gloves-off onslaught greeting Gaza after January 20th. And the thing about that is that the approach so far has not looked particularly gloves-on to me. So what do you imagine here?
Well, I mean, for example, I think without Biden's pressure, and there has been some pressure, there would never have been any humanitarian corridors. There would never have been any ceasefire hostage exchange, as there was early on in the war, remember, when 100 hostages were released during a 5-day ceasefire. When Israel was planning to fire back at Iran after Iran attacked Israel with missiles last month, Biden pressured Netanyahu, look, make it a proportional attack. But I think Trump's inclination, he has said, first thing you've got to do is to attack the nuclear. In other words, go after Iran's nuclear facilities. He has said this openly. He's talked about renewing what he called maximum pressure against Iran, which, by the way, had no effect in his first term. He pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, as a result of which Iran is now closer to enriching enough uranium to build a bomb than it ever has been. And the renewed sanctions had little effect because Iran found other ways to trade outside the purview of the dollar, with China and Russia in particular.
I mean, the main promise, it seems to me, that Donald Trump makes to his voters day in and day out is no more forever wars. Like, leave these regional conflicts alone. But it seems to me like letting these conflicts play out is not really a fair way to put it in the Middle East, because we are simultaneously supplying arms to only one player here. I mean, so, to Israel primarily.
Well, but also to Egypt and Saudi Arabia, but yeah, not to the other guys. Yeah.
So we can't really stay out, and it's not going to cool down under what you're laying out here.
It's like that line, the only memorable line in Godfather 3, where Michael Corleone says, he's wanted to go legit and get out of the mafia, but they keep pulling me back in.
Yeah.
That's the Middle East. They keep pulling us back in. All the wars that have happened since Israel became a state in 1948, they've ultimately been ended by outside pressure. Either the U.S. on Israel, or the Soviet Union at the time that there was such a thing on its Arab allies, when they had them, or the UN. Now the outside countries don't have as much leverage as they used to. I mean, before the Cold War ended, if there were such negotiations going on and the Soviet Union would have been involved at all, the war would have been ended very, very quickly. But now, I mean, Qatar, they're basically Hamas's main middlemen with the rest of the world. They haven't been able to stop Hamas. The way I put it in a couple of columns is everybody wants a ceasefire and freeing of the hostages, except Israel and Hamas. And they're the ones fighting the war. And the outside countries have been either unable or unwilling to really put down the clamps.
It's interesting, talking to you, I feel like the only predictions I feel semi-comfortable making about the next year when it comes to foreign policy are life is about to get a lot worse for Palestinians, and the Ukraine war may end, but I have no idea what that is going to mean for Ukrainians or Ukraine as a sovereign nation.
The sad thing about all of this is that both in the Middle East and in Ukraine, there are diplomatic solutions to all of these, and even opportunities. Iran, whose economy is in terrible condition now, and in fact, the day after the election, the rial, their currency, dropped precipitously. Half of the Iranian leadership wants to make some deals and to become more integrated into the rest of the world, even if it means greatly diminishing support for their axis of resistance, as it's called. But the people on the receiving end of this, Trump, Netanyahu, They don't want that.
Fred, I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Sure, anytime.
Fred Kaplan writes about foreign policy for Slate.com, and he's the author of several books, including a new novel. That's right, a novel, in case you need some distraction right now, and who doesn't. His new book is called A Capital Calamity, and the co-creator of one of my favorite shows, The Americans, has called it, quote, a joyful romp. Go check it out. After our interview, Donald Trump announced his nominee for ambassador to Israel, the former governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee. And that's the show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Madeline Ducharme, and Anna Phillips. We are led by Alicia Montgomery. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. If you are one of those people who is casting about for a new place to hang online, please know you can track me down on Blue Sky if you want. I kept it simple over there. My profile is simply Mary Harris. All right. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time. Hey, it's Mary again. Thanks for sticking around to the end of this episode. Before I say goodbye for the day, quick reminder to take our listener survey that we're running this month. We want to make sure your voice is heard. Visit the show notes or slate.com/whatnextsurvey. It'll only take a few minutes, I promise. Totally painless. Thanks again. I'll see you next episode.